Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so happy to bring to our newsmaker line a wonderful, wonderful friend, Brad Kolodny. He has put together two fascinating books. One is called Seeking Sanctuary, 125 Years of Synagogues on Long Island, and came up with a second book called The Jews of Long Island from 1705 through 1918. All these are published by SUNY Press and are available on Amazon and all your favorite platforms. So, Brad, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rabbi Perl. Nice to be with you. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a great honor. Your work in documenting Jewish history on Long Island, I say, is truly, truly remarkable. But tell
Thank
me, what initially inspired you to start researching and photographing the synagogues?
it goes back 10 years now. 2015, I am a member of Midway Jewish Center in Syosset. And in 2015, we had raised money to have a complete renovation of the sanctuary at Midway. Midway is a typical post-World War II synagogue founded in the 1950s, and in 2015 was in need of some repairs and some updating. I've always been interested in history, and so the night before the demolition of the sanctuary, I wanted to record some history. I wanted to take photographs of the way the sanctuary used to look. For me, having been a member there for many years, there are things that you don't remember when things get changed over. My daughter had her bat mitzvah there. My son had his bar mitzvah. Uh, all the holidays that we attended there and Shabbat, etc. So I wanted to remember or have a record of the way the sanctuary was before the renovation. It's just interesting to think of the memories that are lost when you take a sacred space down to the floorboards and the wall studs, and what memories are lost that people don't can't remember. And
Fantastic.
when I was there the night before the sanctuary demolition, I started to think about this not just at Midway, but in the larger context. What memories have already been lost at synagogues that have undergone similar projects? And even the unfortunate reality that we face that reform and conservative synagogues are closing at an alarming rate. And who is going to remember those buildings, those synagogues, those communities? And I went home that night and I started doing some preliminary research online, and I found very little. There was very little documentation about Long Island Jewish history. So that was the real impetus for me to start photographing synagogues all across Long Island to write the first book.
So, what was the most surprising or moving discovery you made while you were working on this project?
Wow. Well, there are so many. In my travels, the first book that I wrote was Seeking Sanctuary, 125 Years of Synagogues on Long Island. And the book is a hardcover coffee table book that documents every single Jewish house of worship used in Nassau and Suffolk County, both past and present. So maybe one of the most interesting facts or one of the most surprising things is that I photographed 385 buildings
No.
in Nassau and Suffolk County that have been used as a synagogue. In addition to that, there are a number of buildings that were used as a synagogue that no longer stand. They were either lost in a fire or torn down to make room for another synagogue. There's about another 40 or so of those. So at one point or another, there have been over 420 some odd buildings just in Nassau County and Suffolk County alone that were used as a synagogue.
So let's pivot because the synagogues, of course, were populated by Jewish communities over the many years. And then you went on to a second book about the Jews of Long Island between 1705 and 1918, which explores the early presence of Jewish life in this region. Can you help us paint a picture for what Jewish life was like in those early years?
Absolutely. I mean, Long Island was the hinterlands. There were peddlers and there were farmers, and Much about what you hear about that, took place, whether it was on the Lower East Side or, elsewhere in New York City, similar things were happening on Long Island, believe it or not. But it was just much less populated. Some people liked that and they wanted to be outside of the crowded tenements of New York City. So they moved east to Long Island. And one of the most popular professions was being a peddler. And peddlers essentially would buy their goods in New York City and then they would make their way east, either on the Long Island Railroad or very often on foot. And you think about it, when you're a peddler and you're selling your goods, you can only sell what you can carry. So there were men who would start out in New York with packs on their back or whatever they could carry, and they would go from farmhouse to farmhouse and from village to village along the communities on the South Shore and the North Shore, selling whatever goods they could carry. Um,
Amazing.
yeah,
I mentioned, Brad, that in our synagogue there's a Rosenthal family. The grandfather was came to Long Island exactly during this period of time you're covering, and he indeed was a peddler in Oyster Bay. And it tells that the family has a tradition that they actually saw Roosevelt, the president, on a horse one day. And he had his um, connected with all your wonderful writings and his historical background. It turns out that we're now marking the 150th anniversary of Jewish communities here, going back to the first congregation in 1875.
that's
What would
right.
you see as the major turning points that shaped Jewish identity and community here on Long Island?
Well, I guess maybe we should just go back to the fact that Jews have been living on Long Island since 1705. The very first Jew arrived, and there were probably about 50 Jews or so that lived on Long Island up until the Revolutionary War. So you had Jews living, and then into the 1800s, but there were not enough Jews living in any one community to form a congregation until 1875, as you mentioned, and that took place in the village of Breslau, which today is known as Lindenhurst.
Wow.
So there's one interesting trivia question for you. The very first congregation established on Long Island was in Lindenhurst in 1875, and it was formed by 10 German Jewish immigrants who lived in the town of Breslau, which was a German community. Um, and then as more people came out east from New York City, you had the formation of synagogues, largely built around, well, maybe not largely, but it was very common to work in factories. I shouldn't say very common. Sag Harbor, Setauket, and Patchogue, they all had factories, and that drew immigrants from the city. Most of these factory owners would lure these immigrants out, promising them a steady salary and even a place to live. They offered company housing so you could bring your family. So if you're coming into the United States as an immigrant and you don't speak the language and you have no money and you don't have a job or a place to live, an opportunity like this, even if it's in a place you never heard of, was a very good opportunity for a lot of people.
Would it be fair to say that the really Jewish communities then were more in Suffolk County than in Nassau County?
100%. Yes.
Wow, because of these factories and the allure of working and
That's right. Yeah, I
wow.
mentioned I mentioned the three villages of Sag Harbor, Setauket, and Patchogue, but you also had synagogues that were established during this period in Huntington, in Greenport, and then you did have a few in Nassau County. You had Glen Cove was the earliest one in Nassau County, which was formed in 1897. But yes, interestingly enough, during the 19th century and early 20th century, the earliest synagogues were formed in
Okay.
Suffolk County.
So what lessons do you think we could all learn from those earlier Jewish Long Islanders that could be relevant to our times today?
Well, I think it's just about bringing the recognition of our rich Jewish history here on Long Island to the forefront. Most people feel or know about Long Island as a Jewish community in the post-World War II era. And the fact is that there was a tremendous growth of the Jewish community on Long Island after 1945.
Right.
But there is a very rich history of Jews living on Long Island even before the end of World War One. And that was sort of the premise of the second book, The Jews of Long Island, 1705 to 1918. I was able to identify over 4,000 Jews by name who lived on Long Island before the end of World War One.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so in the book, I have documented all of them. Their names appear in, chapter by chapter. If they lived in Freeport or if they lived in, East Hampton or wherever, their names appear in the book. So I think the lesson is that there's a rich Jewish history that we have on Long Island that most people don't really know about. And I think that through the two books, and then also subsequently, I have founded the Jewish Historical Society of Long Island, and the sole purpose of the organization as a nonprofit group is to uh, serve as a repository of Long Island Jewish records and artifacts, and also to bring that information to the public to teach people and to bring awareness about the Jewish history that exists for over 300 years.
We're speaking with Brad Kolodny, who has authored two amazing books about Jewish life on Long Island. One is covering all the 125 years of synagogues across Long Island, called Seeking Sanctuary, and also the Jews of Long Island, guess what? Going back to 1705 through 1918. Things have adapted, Jewish communities have adapted over the years, and you've documented so much. How some have flourished, others have merged, and some have closed. What do you say about the shifting dynamics currently in Jewish life on Long Island?
Well, in the earliest days, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the most popular form of Judaism was Orthodoxy, and these were congregations that were being started by immigrants who were observant Jews who came from Europe and wanted to continue those traditions living in the United States. Um, the tipping point in the 20s and 30s, you had a few congregations in the Reform movement, but the tipping point was really after World War II and the post-World War II era, the 1950s, 1960s, is when conservative Judaism really flourished, as well as Reform. It was the next generation. It was Judaism in a way that the individuals wanted to observe that wasn't the way their parents had experienced it. And now you have, somewhat of a coming back to Orthodox Judaism. Obviously, the Five Towns has flourished as an Orthodox community. I tip my kippah to you and the Chabad rabbis on Long Island, who I think have done a fantastic job in outreach to the unaffiliated. And I think the reform and conservative movements, need to rethink their models. They're operating in these huge buildings that come with huge expenses, and the population and the membership is in decline. So, and the decline is interesting because it's not related to there not being enough Jews around. It's just the fact that a certain portion of the Jewish population is not affiliating with synagogues the way they did in previous generations. The fact is, Rabbi Perl, there are over 300,000 Jews that live on Long Island today. And here's an interesting fact that makes Long Island the fourth largest Jewish community in the United States today. Number one is New York City, number two is Los Angeles, and number
Florida.
three is Southern Florida.
Okay.
And then Long Island is number four.
Wow, wow. Is there a particular story, perhaps, or a person, or a synagogue, or a historical event that has stayed with you most with all this research and photographing and writing about Long
Uh,
Island Curie?
It's an interesting question. Um, I think the person that I have the most admiration for is a gentleman by the name of Elias Pataky. And Elias Pataky moved to Kings Park in the very late 19th century, about 1897, and he started the synagogue in Kings Park out in Suffolk County, right? Another early congregation that was established in 1904. Elias Pataky also was instrumental in forming the Jewish Brotherhood of Huntington, which was nearby, and also contributed to the synagogue in Lindenhurst that was formed in 1915. So you had this one man in the early 1900s who was doing, I guess, everything that he could to see that Judaism was taking hold on Long
Mm,
Island. And he was a founder and a contributor to three very early synagogues. And by 1918, there were 13 synagogues on Long Island, and he helped to organize three of them. So um, Elias Pataky, it's interesting when the Kings Park, the Brotherhood of Jews of Kings Park was established in 1904. There were seven original members, and four of them were named Pataky. So they sort of they
came
ran the
together.
show in Kings Park as far as the Jewish community was concerned.
Wow, wow, fantastic. Now, you spent so much time documenting the history of Long Island. Have you ever attempted to declare yourself the chief rabbi of Long Island's Jewish trivia? And if so, what would be the most obscure fact that you'd like to share with us?
I don't know about the chief rabbi, but I would certainly consider myself you know based on the work that I've done, starting the Jewish Historical Society, it's a passion for me, and I enjoy sharing all the information that I've learned from various sources. And so, is there what did you ask? Is there like a
Any
particular fact?
obscure fact, one obscure fact that really would be
Yes, I do.
important?
I do have an obscure fact. In addition to the points of interest that I've already shared, first Jew on Long Island, 1705, first congregation, 1875. And incidentally, that congregation that started in 1875, they never built a synagogue, but they did purchase land in the Breslau Cemetery in 1876. And that cemetery is still an active Jewish cemetery today. So that's the oldest, remaining remnant, if you will, of Jewish communal gathering on Long Island. The first synagogue was built in Setauket in 1896. But the interesting fact that I'll share with you, um, there is a woman by the name of Betty Robbins, and in 1955, Betty Robbins uh, had her picture on the front page of the New York Times. Why did she get her name and picture on the front page of the New York Times in 1955? She was hired as a cantor at Temple Avoda in Oceanside, which made her the first female cantor, not just on Long Island, not just in the United States, but in the history of the Jewish people. There had not been a woman hired to be a regular cantor, and Betty Robbins was the very first. It happened right here on Long Island in Oceanside in 1955, and that was a big deal. It made headlines in
Wow.
1955.
Let's talk a little bit about Jewish food. And in all your research, did you ever come across any surprising Jewish culinary, traditions unique to Long Island, like legendary bagel shops or knishes that have their own historical plaque or something like that? In all this research.
I mean, the food is not such a focus of what I do, but
Ah,
you've probably heard of Bagel Boss. Uh,
yes.
Bagel Boss has been around on Long Island since the 1970s, and they are the inventor of the flagel, the flat bagel. Um,
Right.
that might be one anecdote to share.
Right. So, in your book, you cover life, of course, primarily from the 1700s. If one of those early Jewish settlers suddenly walked into a modern Long Island synagogue today, what do you think their reaction would be? Would they be impressed with the Torah study or the synagogue with high-speed Wi-Fi?
I think that they might be shocked just by the buildings themselves, in
How
the
big?
yeah, in the 1900s, early 1900s, the synagogues that were built on Long Island were very plain, very ordinary, very standard construction. They were buildings that were put up. You couldn't really necessarily identify it as a synagogue. And today, obviously, you have such, modern buildings with beautiful stained glass and artwork and all kinds of things. Um, so I think depending on where you go, the person who was coming back from the 19th century uh, would be quite shocked with what they see for sure.
Our synagogue in Mineola was built back in the 30s.
Yes, sir.
You would never build a shul anyway because it has 13 high steps to go up, like many of the synagogues at that time, and it would never meet the OSHA laws or the laws of helping handicapped to going into a shul. Fantastic. So you've photographed many synagogues. Um, be honest, have you ever walked into a synagogue and said to yourself, this bima could use an interior designer?
No question about it. I mean, listen, there are synagogues that were built in the 1950s and 60s that need to be redone. And there are different designs and ideas that come about. I can reference again the synagogue renovation that took place at Midway Jewish Center in Syosset. The typical construction of 1950s synagogues was having the bima, as the focal point where the rabbi would stand and give his Devar Torah and lead the congregation. Well, Midway decided that they wanted to make the rabbi more within the congregation, and so they took the rabbi's lectern and the shulchan for reading Torah, and they put it in the middle of the room. So everything happens on the same level, not up on the bima, which can be seen as away from everything that's happening, but within the congregation. So there are changes being made. It's a style that you see in a lot of Sephardic synagogues. You see it that way, and Midway has taken on that similar tradition.
That is actually standard in most Orthodox synagogues where the
Yes,
bima is in the middle.
yes.
Since you helped us appreciate the celebration of 150 years of Jewish communal gathering, and you've created a Jewish Historical Society. Um, what would happen if the Jewish community threw a beautiful 150th anniversary party? What should be on the menu? And do you think anybody would actually show up on time?
Well, well, it's not a what if, Rabbi. It's happening.
It's happening. Tell
We
us.
are celebrating
Ah,
150 years of Jewish community on Long Island, and we've rolled out the first wave of what we consider to be a number of different fun things. If you go to our website, jhsli.org, which stands for Jewish Historical Society of Long Island, there's a video on the homepage that I put together with a wonderful video producer named Dana Arshan. Um, the video gives an overview of the history. It's a mini documentary of the history of Judaism and the history of Jewish communal gathering over 150 years. But the maybe even more exciting is coming up in June. We're going to be having a museum exhibit at the Suffolk County Historical Society Museum in Riverhead, and it's going to be an exhibit of 150 years of Jewish communal gathering on Long Island. And so we have artifacts from going back as far as 1887, papers and documents and photographs. And, we have artifacts from synagogues that no longer exist, and all the communities will be represented and, just the different, because obviously synagogues are the key to Jewish communal gathering, but it doesn't have to be from a synagogue. The JCCs provide wonderful opportunities for gathering as a community with other Jews. There are youth organizations, summer camps, philanthropic organizations like UJA and AJC. There are so many ways to be involved and to be connected within a Jewish community. And that's what we just want to bring to light, that everybody should know a little bit about this history, and even to give themselves a little bit of a stronger a feeling for Jewish community on Long Island.
Did you ever think, Brad, that you would take your video and pitch it with Hollywood for a full-length documentary? And do you think should have either Jerry Seinfeld or your booby to do the narration, you know?
Jerry Seinfeld would be perfect. He
He's
might be
Long
hard to
Island.
get, but he's only one famous person from Long Island. Jerry grew up in Massapequa, but he went to shul in Amityville,
Yes,
across the county line. But you have Billy Crystal, who is from
right.
Long Beach. You have Natalie Portman from Syosset. You have Amy Schumer, who was from Rockville Center, and even a little bit more obscure, you have people going back a little bit further. Rodney Dangerfield
He's from
uh,
Long Island?
was from Babylon.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah,
Wow.
and if you want another interesting fact, during World War One, there was an army base in Yaphank, and one of the soldiers that was stationed there in Yaphank was Irving Berlin, the very famous composer. Produced many Broadway shows, etc. He was in the army, and he was based on Long Island in Yaphank. What did the army do when he enlisted? They had him write a show, and the show was brought to Broadway to help raise funds for the army base in Yaphank.
Hmm.
The name of the show took the name of the location. It was called Yip Yip Yaphank. Kind of a funny
Wow.
name, but the
Okay.
interesting part of the story is that Irving Berlin wrote the finale for this show, and the finale was God Bless America.
That's where it came from.
It did well. The fact is that he wrote it for that show, but he didn't use it because God Bless America was such a patriotic song, still is. But the show Yip Yip Yap Hank was very lighthearted. It was a musical review, and he felt it didn't match. So 20 years later, so he wrote God Bless America. He put the song away in his footlocker. And
Hmm.
20 years later, he gave it to Kate Smith, and she performed God Bless America on her radio show. And as they say, the rest of his is history. But it's incredible to think that a Jewish immigrant living on Long Island wrote what is probably our nation's most patriotic song.
Wow. Now, your work reminds us, of course, Brad, how history connects generations. And here we are today talking about the synagogues of yesteryear, what we can learn. Now, if you could travel back to one era of Long Island's Jewish history, just for one day, where would you go and what would you bring with you? A camera or a shtickle nosh?
Wow.
Yeah. Oh,
I guess it would probably be to, this one of the earliest Jewish communal gatherings, and definitely bring a camera to, record what was happening, and how did these men get together, and what was the impetus for them starting a congregation. You mentioned generation to generation, Lador Vador, and it makes me think of a number of Long Island Jewish businesses that have been around since the early 1900s that are still in operation today. There are a number of businesses. There's the Amityville Men's Shop is a clothing store in Amityville that started in 1911, and it is still in business today, run by the great grandson of the founder. You also have London Jewelers, a very well-known jeweler on Long Island. It was started in Glen Cove in 1926 by Charles London. And next year they will be celebrating their 100th anniversary. So there are a number of examples of businesses and things that have existed 3, 4 generations ago that we can still touch and feel because it's the same family that is involved. Actually, right near
Harry
your
Katz, the Katz, Katz.
I was just going to say
Yeah,
that Harry Katz Carpet One was
correct,
started in 1916 by Joseph Katz, and
correct.
then his son Harry went into business as a floor, selling carpeting and flooring, and that business still exists on Jericho Turnpike in
True.
Mineola.
And then the synagogue, our synagogue was there It
That's
was the
right.
predecessor to
Joseph
the
Katz
shul.
was one of the founders.
And
Absolutely.
Gary Katz now and his with his sister
Still
continue
running the
doing
business.
the
That's
business.
right.
So we're speaking to Brad Kolodny. He's put together an amazing two books that I urge everybody to take a look at. Go to Amazon, try to get hold of it, to buy it. One is called Seeking Sanctuary, 125 Years of Synagogues on Long Island. And of course, the other book is Covering the Jews of Long Island between the years 1705 and 1918. Um, you know, I was thinking if this becomes a full length history event, what kind of jingle you think you would have for it? Either Am Yisrael Chai, would you have a Billy Joel classic, or would you have the sound of people arguing over who gets the last piece of kugel? You know, so
All of the above.
all of the above. I knew it. I knew it.
A
I knew
little
it.
bit of everything.
I think,
Yeah. Yeah. Billy
yeah,
Joel, another
absolutely. He's from
member.
Hicksville, right? From Hicksville,
Is. That's
and
exactly right.
wonderful, wonderful,
Never graduated high school.
interesting. You
Did
see,
not graduate high school.
wow.
Ended up
I,
getting an honorary degree many years later, but also still, lived on Long Island for many years. I think he recently sold his house in
Center Island, I think.
Center Island. That's
Yes,
right.
yes.
Or maybe it's for sale. It hasn't sold. I don't know.
Okay. So I really want to thank you, Brad, for coming on and sharing all this. And I think all of us who live on Long Island, whether Nassau and Suffolk County, can appreciate that we are continuing Jewish life on Long Island on the shoulders of giants who preceded us, and that we can learn so much for those who came when it was really unpopulated and it was far away from Jewish life, from, like you say, the tenements and all the Lower East Side, and built institutions and built generations of Jewish people. So I want to thank you for bringing that alive to us and a deeper appreciation of where we're living and how much went into Jewish life over these many years. And so thank you so
Well,
much for
thank you for having me on, and I would just encourage people if you're interested beyond the books and if you want to learn more, again, go to our website jhsli.org, and you can sign up to receive our monthly newsletter, keep you apprised of news and events, especially this 150th anniversary year being such a great reason to celebrate our faith and our history here on Long Island.
And also, I want everyone to know that, Brad, you're available to come to the synagogues or to a gathering of people, and you'll be as a guest speaker. You're
For
available for
sure.
that as well.
Yeah, I've
Thank you
spoken
again.
at many synagogues, so thank you for plugging that in there.
Thank you, Brad. Wishing you continued success.